The Balan Theater will always be there when your heart needs it the most. Though you might not remember, you've been to this theater many times before. One day, just as it does for you and all, it appears to Leo Craig, a dancer from the city, and Emma Cole, a girl from a wealthy family, in their time of greatest need. The two find it difficult to trust those around them, and thus live lives of solitude and uncertainty. They don't know why, but they feel a particular calling to it, curious to explore. Once inside, they meet Balan, the theater's maestro, an eccentric man brimming with optimism and overwhelming positivity. Balan tells Leo and Emma that a piece of their heart is missing, and that they must journey to the Wonderworld to mend them. And so, through its doors, they embark on an adventure into the magical land that is Balan Wonderworld. Balan Wonderworld was the passion project of Yuji Naka, a legendary Japanese video game designer, producer, and programmer. He was behind famous titles such as the original Sonic the Hedgehog series, Phantasy Star Online, and Nights into Dreams, the main inspiration for Balan Wonderworld. Naka left Sega in 2006 and would later join Square Enix in January of 2018 to direct Balan Wonderworld. Square Enix, impressed with Naka's previous platforming titles, gave Naka the go-ahead, but under the condition that it was his one chance with the genre. In order to make Balan Wonderworld a reality, Naka assembled an ambitious team of artists and designers under a new subsidiary named Balan Company. Balan Company was assisted by Arzest, a company who had assisted Nintendo with the programming of several video games. However, despite Arzest's unfortunate track record for rather unpolished and forgettable titles, such as Yoshi's New Island and Mario and Sonic at the Rio 2016 Olympic Games, Naka was willing to take the chance upon knowing that he would be working with his colleague Naoto Oshima once more. Oshima, now one of Arzest's key staff members, was the man who designed both Sonic the Hedgehog and Dr. Eggman, and had collaborated with Naka on Sonic Adventure in 1998. Oshima ended up being the one to come up with the concept and design for Balan, as well as other designs present in the final game. The art director of Balan Company is Masamichi Harada, with Yono Endo behind the gorgeous poster designs that was used in promotion of the video game. The game's difficulty was for the most part handled entirely by AI, developed by Yoichiro Miyake from Square Enix, a specialist of game AI. And lastly, the breathtaking music for Balan Wonderworld was composed by Ryo Yamazaki, who is also the mastermind behind the soundtracks of Front Mission and Final Fantasy Crystal Chronicles. Surely Balan Wonderworld had the makings of a modern-day masterpiece, right? Well, yes and no. The tale of Balan Wonderworld is mostly that of a tragedy, as the video game could not hold even a candle to what was expected of it. Sales were devastating, with less than 2,100 copies in its opening week in Japan. Not even false reviews could salvage Balan Wonderworld's reputation, as it received on average a 4 out of 10, spanning from the game's demo to its eventual release. This very clash in expectation led to Balan Wonderworld becoming somewhat of a punching bag on the internet, with many content creators on YouTube seeing it an easy opportunity to bash the game for its many shortcomings. Here are some examples.
No, it's not. Are you serious? What about it being a $60 game? I just fucking bought the game. Yeah, I'm serious. I just paid for this. It's a fucking $60 game.
There it is. Like, I'm not even messing with you. Jump/costume ability. Everything.
I've discovered a glitch. They actually put in a power-up that does something.
Change slipstreams. Oh, great. Perfect. Great time for this. Fantastic.
I wasted my time with this game, so you should not do the same.
But how? How could a game with so much heart put into it, that oozed so much personality, ended up flopping this hard? Backed by such legendary developers and artists, it could have easily became Game of the Year, right? Unfortunately, what happened to Balan Wonderworld was the collective result of several clashes of ideals during the game's development, disconnect between the intended audience and the game's strongest aspects, sloppy programming and animation in critical areas, failure to playtest the game and work out blatant criticisms early on, and ultimately putting way too many eggs in one basket. While it's extremely evident that the Balan Wonderworld video game had many blunders, it would also be very wrong to say that the entire project was a complete failure and should have never taken fruition whatsoever. The world building, characters, and music of Balan Wonderworld are all phenomenal, and upon closer inspection reveals that this is where the heart of the project resides. You see, Balan Wonderworld also has an incredibly elaborate side novel titled Balan Wonderworld, Maestro of Mystery, Theater of Wonders, that further elaborates upon the events that take place in the game and give insight to the full backstory, personality, and ambitions of each of its characters. This novel was written by Soshi Kawasaki, an incredibly skilled Japanese author who had expanded on the stories of several other video games in the past, such as Yoshi's Island DS and Vampire Reign. It only costs $10 for a digital copy on most platforms, and I highly recommend reading it. Therefore, my personal recommendation for a true and rewarding experience of the story is to read through the novel first, and then use the Balan Wonderworld video game somewhat as a visual aid and musical ambiance. That way, you can truly enjoy the strongest aspects of the Balan Wonderworld story without being let down by the limiting, frustrating, and overall incomplete experience that is the video game. So, without further ado, here is a combined summary of what the Balan Wonderworld novel tells of, and what the video game attempts to convey in its gameplay, but ultimately leaves a lot out of. And so, our journey to the Wonderworld begins. Leo has been in Wonderworld as long as he can remember, dancing in the city, content all on his own. One day, a man who calls himself Lance appears to Leo, greeting himself as the Maestro of the Wonderworld. The city which Leo currently resides in is his very own stage, a personal realm which Lance had granted to Leo which he has full control over. Lance bestows the nickname of Street Beat to Leo in reference to his passion for dancing in the streets of his city. At first reluctant, Leo accepts Lance's advice, finding himself unable to remember anything about himself prior to Lance's arrival. He isn't the only person in Wonderworld with a stage, as he is soon introduced to a young girl by the name of Clock Tower Kid. She too has been in Wonderworld for as long as she can remember, possibly even way longer than Street Beat. Clock Tower Kid offers to show Street Beat across her stage, as well as the many other stages of the inhabitants of Wonderworld. The first stage they travel to is that of the pensive Perot, a young amusement park clown who constantly finds himself unable to get his mind off of the silver-haired princess, a woman who exists neither in his stage or across the others in Wonderworld which he's traveled to. He's very good friends with the Clock Tower Kid, as the two of them often travel the Wonderworld together. Upon further discussion, the three discover that they've all shared common visions of a young girl named Fighter and a smiling man in a top hat, none other than Balan. Clock Tower Kid has occasionally had visions of a cat-like monster. She's traumatized by the thought so much that upon hearing the word cat, causes her to tense up in fear. Eager to join Clock Tower Kid on her travels once more, Pensive, along with Street Beat, venture onwards to the other stages of Wonderworld. Across this journey, the trio is occasionally stopped by Lance, who warns them that searching for the truth behind Wonderworld will only end up hurting them. Consistently tormented by these visions, feel that knowing the truth is the only way to stop them, and press onwards anyways. The next two stages are those of Scarecrow and Bugsy, a kind farmer who spends his days relaxing in his rocking chair, and a young girl who tends to her stage's many insects. The visions are commonplace among them as well, but they haven't given it much thought as they are both very content with the way of life on their stage. The trio then journeys to the stages of the Watcher and the Sentinel, a woman and a man who strive to protect the forest and the city they love from potential danger. They too are very concerned about the visions and often visit each other's stage as a means of checking in and looking after each other as well. Then the trio travels to the stages of Skygazer and Seagazer, a young boy and girl who admire the skies and the seas of their stages. Seagazer's visions of the monster are so vivid that Skygazer often feels a need to go wherever she goes. Next up are the stages of the Madam of the Mansion and Checkered King, a woman and a man of noble and royal status. Along with common visions, they both experience the surge in Tims in their stages, interfering with their ways of life and ultimately frustrating the two. The second to last stage the trio travel to is that of the Invisible Custodian, an elderly man who tries his best to clean after the ruins he resides over. Much like Scarecrow, he feels no reason to concern himself with the visions. However, the last stage, that of the Lady of the Midnight Sun, is one which normally not traveled to, as she makes strong effort to isolate herself. It ends up being Fighter, the girl from everyone's visions, who leads the way, telling the trio that it was Balan who sent her. The lady is reluctant to speak to the four. However, with reformation of the visions as well as the other inhabitants' concerns, she agrees to speak, and meets up with everyone else in the stage of Clock Tower Kid for a meeting. Here, the inhabitants exchange their observations, findings, and even theories about the Wonderworld amongst one another. Of course, Lance appears to all, answering one by one of the questions and concerns about Wonderworld raised by its inhabitants. The inhabitants of Wonderworld belong to that of another, one which Lance claims they've despised and voluntarily escaped from. Balan wishes to send the inhabitants back, with Fighter working to dismantle each of the stages one by one. The Tims are creatures under Balan's control, while the Negati belong to Lance. Apparently, Balan wants to claim the Wonderworld as his own, but Lance is the one who owns it, right? Lance tells all that the only way to expel Balan from Wonderworld is for the inhabitants to defend their respective stages and to fight him. But doing so comes at the cost of relearning the memories that were intentionally kept away from them. Content with their lives in Wonderworld and the friends they made along the way, how could they say no? How could they give in to Balan, a man who is so eager to take all of that away from them? Lance transforms before their eyes, revealing a shadowy form much resembling the Negati, and one by one the memories of each of the inhabitants are returned. Each returned memory reveals a distinct and individual trauma, one to which transforms each inhabitant into a Negati-like monster called a Negaboss. Lance assures, however, that once Balan is defeated, he can return them all to normal and they can all continue their lives in Wonderworld together again. But for now, the pain in their hearts and the negativity that accompanies them must temporarily be weaponized for their fight against the false Maestro. However, upon returning to his own stage, Street Beat finds himself unable to transform. Balan and his assistant Fighter, now revealed to be Emma, have arrived just in time. Emma reminds Street Beat that he is Leo, and the two have indeed met before. It is revealed that Balan is the true Maestro of Wonderworld, and that Lance has deceived the other 12 inhabitants. Balan brings people of all walks of life to the Wonderworld when they are plagued by an overwhelming despair. The Wonderworld was intended as a place of healing, and once their hearts have been mended, sends them back to right where they left off in the real world. It is also revealed that Lance, the embodiment of the world's negativity, feeds off of this despair. Exploiting those vulnerable in Wonderworld, he grows in power and has established such an overwhelming reputation that Balan is unable to reverse this alone. Leo and Emma have attempted to fight off Lance long ago, but were nowhere near ready. Thus, Leo and Emma's new mission becomes that of saving the other 12 inhabitants from Lance's influence, mending their hearts and ultimately driving off Lance so that they can live their lives once more. It is in part 3 of the novel, which is where the events of the video game take place. Because of this, I'll now explain how the game works and give a quick summary as to how it aligns with the narrative of the Balan Wonderworld story. As mentioned before, Balan Wonderworld is a platformer, meaning that the levels, being the inhabitant stages, are rendered entirely in 3D. Throughout the core gameplay, puzzles are solved and enemies are defeated using the game system of power-ups, coming in the form of costumes. Each costume comes with its own unique ability, such as shooting projectiles or enable the player temporary flight or additional jumps. Costumes are obtained in each stage by acquiring a key and then using the key on a crystal containing the costume. Both are placed relatively close to each other as Balan Company anticipated most players of their game to be young children. However, one of the game's most glaring flaws is entirely because of these costumes in the first place. Early in Balan Wonderworld's development, Naka proposed the idea of the game having 80 unique costumes as one of its core selling points. Initially, Naka was very convinced that this was far too ambitious and that the number of costumes would have to be significantly reduced. But the art team managed to create designs for all 18 costumes anyways, so Naka felt compelled to include all of them. This of course led to many issues in keeping the game concise. First off, because now there were so many costumes to work with, Naka was worried that it would become very difficult to remember the controls of each if the abilities of each costumes were elaborate. His solution? limiting each costume to a specific ability and with the exact same button used to activate them. This design choice, of course, was executed as horribly as it sounds. This essentially made the entirety of the gameplay routed simply to just moving, jumping, and using the one action that each costume enabled. And because there were 80 of them, it was inevitable that certain abilities became either recycled entirely or contradicted others, as several of the costumes restricted the ability to jump, as many costumes' specific action completely overrides jumping entirely. This made it so that certain parts of the stage could not be completed without either losing that particular costume or completely starting over from where you last left off. But enough negativity, let's talk about the good aspects of Balan Wonderworld's level design. As I mentioned before, each of the levels are each of the inhabitants' different stages. For example, Scarecrow's stage is a giant farmland. The art direction of each of the different stages is phenomenal, and completely encapsulates each of the characters they represent. Occasionally throughout the stages you will encounter the Tims. The main collectible of the game come in the form of tears. You're of course collecting the Happy Tears, which you can use to tend to the Tims in the game's hub world, the Island of Tims. While not required to complete the game, collecting the tears and tending to the Tims is one of the many steps needed to unlock the Balan costume, the most overpowered costume in the entire game. The Balan costume enables the player seemingly endless flight. Of course, the process is incredibly tedious, and the costume can be lost in the same manner as any other, requiring the entire process to be repeated once again. You will also occasionally come across illusions of the inhabitant belonging to that particular stage. Now, what the novel does that the video game does not is include the purpose of the heart trees. These trees essentially house the missing fragments of the inhabitant's heart, which come in the form of additional memories, typically involving content that was not present in the final game. Lastly, there are the Negabosses, the main enemies of the game. As the novel has already elaborated, these are the monstrous forms that the inhabitants have undergone upon their most traumatic memories being restored to them, being consumed by their overwhelming negativity. Upon defeating the Negaboss in the video game leads to a musical cutscene of the player dancing with the inhabitant they had freed and the many costumes that helped them to do so. Now, something exclusive to the video game is that a certain number of Balan statues are required to progress onwards, an additional form of collectible. These Balan statues are obtained by exploring alternate routes in each of the levels, and typically require a costume that enables extra mobility or jumping to obtain. Other Balan statues are obtained through defeating a Negaboss using 3 different costumes, or various minigames Balan Wonderworld has to offer. Balan's Bout is a quick-time event cutscene minigame where the player has to time a button press with Balan performing a specific action within the cutscene. However, this particular minigame is often the bane of many players' experience, and exact precision is required to earn the Balan statue. If a player does not perform all of the precise button presses, the Balan statues are not obtained, and the minigame cannot be accessed until the Negaboss for that level is defeated again, or the player force quits the game and returns to a checkpoint prior to the minigame. The sports minigames come in the form of costumes of the same name, which of course prompt the player to play a minigame with a sport theme to earn the Balan statue for that stage. Once enough Balan statues are collected, the player can then progress on to the next stage, and once all 12 stages are cleared, then the player can finally battle Lance. There is a multi-part battle like how most tend to go in video games. At one point, Lance even had an attack which was said to contain rapidly flashing lights which could cause seizures, which was immediately patched out of the game as soon as possible. Of course, the player cannot do this alone, and it's through the assistance of the other 12 inhabitants which give them the final bit of strength needed to take on Lance's final form.
Hello to the Wonderworld.
Upon Lance's defeat, he is once again returned to his original form. However, unlike the inhabitants, he is unable to be saved. The novel reveals that Lance was once the original Balan, having been the original Maestro of Wonderworld. Becoming too attached to the inhabitants, he had become consumed with negativity, transforming him into Lance. While he could create a new Balan to take his place, Lance knows that he could never return himself to former glory, and ultimately succumb to a life of inevitable negativity. He tells Balan that he too is destined to become just like him, but Balan asserts that he will never fall to the same fate as Lance. There is one final musical cutscene, far more spectacular than the rest. Then we are given one final cutscene which for the most part summarizes the resolution of the novel. All the inhabitants' hearts have been mended, and thus it is time to say their goodbyes and venture on outside of the Wonderworld. Leo and Emma's departure being so impactful towards Balan that he is moved to tears, revealing his very own true form as well. Depending on which character you play as, the game ends with the resolution of either Leo or Emma's story, which takes place in the real world. But something I did not tell you before is that upon defeating the Nega Boss and watching the musical cutscene, players of the video game are given insight as to the resolutions of all 12 of the other Wonderworld inhabitants as well. The resolutions of each of the inhabitants is definitely the most subjective between the novel and the video game, which is why I kept this detail last. One major difference between them is that certain outcomes in the novel are somewhat bittersweet and not as entirely rewarding as those in the video game. I can completely understand this change though, and for the most part agree with them doing so. Ultimately, there is a happy ending for each of the inhabitants, Leo and Emma included. They learn to make do with their current situation, and that there is indeed light at the end of the tunnel. For some characters, such as Emma or Cass Milligan, the Clock Tower Kid, what they feared most ended up never occurring in the first place.
Hooray! It's time to step in.